Hello, my name is Charlsey Bickett, and I'm the Executive Director of Mary's Place Refugee Outreach, and I am thrilled to be here for the Book Sandwiched In program, where I was asked to speak about an amazing book, The Map of Salt and Stars, which I really hope people have had the opportunity to read it, because this is such a beautiful book. I was really struck by how honest and real this story felt, despite being a novel, but that there were parts of this book that I sat back and thought about actual women, actual families that I have interacted with in Mary's Place that have gone through similar things, whether it be the tragedy of becoming a refugee and fleeing and having terrible humanitarian tragedies happen to their family, but also the book shows the resiliency of refugees and how people come together, strangers many times, like in this book, that come and want to help and just want to do everything they can so that these families who did not choose to be refugees can find a peaceful life. And I was actually hesitant about reading it at first, because we work a lot with emergency situations, and we see a lot of families on their worst day when we are trying to do everything we can to help them. So I was worried about reading this book if it would make me feel down or more upset, but it was so beautiful. I could not put it down. It was amazing, the perspective of coming from a young girl. One of the most horrifying things about the plight of refugees in our world right now is we have the largest number of refugees in modern history, far surpassing the numbers post World War II, and 51% of all refugees are children. 80% are women and children. So to have this book centered around a mother and her three daughters, who literally 1 minute are living in their home in Syria and the next are fleeing for their lives with nothing. It's astounding, and it's real. And there were so many little moments that, again, were so accurate about refugee life, especially now having this book talking about the current tragedy in Syria. The mother at one point is making the announcement to her family that she had applied for asylum in the United States, and that she was really worried because it was going to take so long, possibly years, to go through all the paperwork, to do the required vetting, to do the interviews, to do the biometric testing. And the reality is the majority of families who I work with were living in camps 10 to 20 years before being resettled, and oftentimes it was over 2 years, just the process of going through working with the UN and then working with the U.S. Department of State and Homeland Security, just to be able to resettle in the U.S. And when we're talking about these numbers, it's 75 million people who are either internally displaced in their own countries or are refugees who have fled to another country. And of that huge number, only 1% will ever be resettled in a third country. It is incredibly difficult to be resettled, and it takes a really long time. And we are always hearing stories about family separation, about family members who didn't make it, about people who are left behind. And it's really heartbreaking, especially now when the refugee resettlement program is closed. Obviously, with COVID-19, a lot of immigration has stalled. In a lot of cases, it was a really good excuse to stop refugee resettlement, considering that the entire program had been decimated with the current administration, and that Rochester in 2016 resettled over 1,000 refugees, and this past fiscal year it was less than 200. And it's really devastating because you get the reminder of that there are people waiting and waiting and waiting for just the chance to be able to come here. And so it was a really wonderful opportunity for me to reflect and be more grounded and centered. And despite how difficult it can be when we're trying to advocate on behalf of our families, we're trying to make sure that families are not going to be evicted, and we're making sure that families are getting enough food and hygiene products, and that the kids who a lot of our families enter the U.S. with the least amount of English and the least amount of education. We primarily serve women, many of which are the head of a household for between 8 and 10 or 12 children. And the idea of spending 20 years in a camp and then coming to the United States, sometimes as a widow with that many children, and the expectation that you're going to have to learn a brand new language, and you're going to have to find full-time employment, and you are supposed to just be fine and settled within 90 days, which is the very short period of time that our families nationally are given support to resettle here. How insane that sounds. Mary's Place exists because we realized that after those 90 days, there was still so much help that families needed, trying to navigate everything from law and order to the education system to Department of Social Services, how to go to a grocery store, how to get your kid on the school bus. And when I think about the hardships and how difficult it is for these families, I'm constantly reminded of their resiliency. These families are so hardworking. These families have been through so much that I don't know I could get out of bed after experiencing, and yet they get up every day. And so many times mothers have said to me that they are so grateful that they're here because their children can go to school. The right to a free education is something that many of our families have never experienced. So when you have a mom that has less than a second grade education, and she is illiterate not only in English but in her first language, how incredibly overwhelming it is to find your place in Rochester. So we really pride ourselves that we work with these families. We work to build trust amongst people who have been through so much trauma, so that they feel comfortable coming to us and letting us help them. Again, I'm from Mary's Place Refugee Outreach. I strongly recommend this book, even if you don't know anything about the current plight of refugees worldwide. I think this is a really, really great introduction, again, because you're seeing it through the eyes of a really exceptional young lady. I think the main character is about 12 years old when we meet her. And the way that she sees the world around her is just so honest and so fascinating, because she really cares and focuses on the people around her, the family around her. And I have just seen so much selflessness in the families that we serve. And I just think it's remarkable, and I really hope that many people read it and share it and have something to talk about. My mother has been hunting me down because she's like, I want to read it next. And I said, no, I have to keep it because I'm not ready yet. But yes, Mom, you can have the book.
Can I ask a question?
Great. Sure.
So this is Dina at the camera. In the book, there's the importance of the map, and it seems there's like something, maybe in a lot of refugee stories or journey stories, whether or not they're fiction or fantasy, that there's something important that a family always makes sure to hold on to.
Yes.
Do you ever experience that in real life, that there's like the one thing that was carried that made it through the camps?
One thing that we often don't think about, and that this book gave the perfect example, is just how quickly the need to get out was. they made a special point in the book, and it was really great that they did. I had written notes about it. Was that the mother, right after their house was in shambles, that she immediately went to a box she had that had passports and had other documentation. Proof that your family is essential, because if you don't have those documents, then there's a lot of times that you can't move forward with the refugee resettlement process. So just the fact that in those moments she stopped and got those documents and we're holding on to those is so important. We find things like that, having your child's birth certificate so that there can't be a question that this is your child. Those are the things that we don't think about as being priceless and important. But how difficult that is when families don't have them, or how much longer the process of being vetted is when they're trying to go and get this information from areas that are currently unsafe or are dealing with war or other are difficult things. You find that is what means the most to the parents, is again that proof that my son is my son, my husband is my husband, and we need to be together, because we see this even in the book, that the family gets split apart and have realistic moments where they say, I don't know if I'm ever going to see my mother again. I don't know if I'm ever going to this, that, and the other. And I cannot tell you the amount of people that I have interacted with that have shared those same feelings. We had a woman who was convinced that her mother had passed away in a camp. They were separated, they were in different camps, and she found out that her mother had been resettled to the UK. And the look on her face when she said, my mother is alive and is getting medical care, and it was, she was completely convinced. So the idea that using the technology that we have now, like WhatsApp, so that they can communicate and see each other's faces over the phone. Family is always what comes first, and it makes you just realize that so many things that we take for granted and so many things that we value when it comes to stuff or things, when really, it puts family in a whole new perspective, and culturally it's really wonderful too. We serve so many families from 10 different countries, and it doesn't matter where you were born, it doesn't matter where you were in a camp. The importance of family and having multiple generations living together and taking care of each other is something that all of these cultures seem to share and focus on, and it's really interesting to see that with American culture, where we do seem to be more independent and we do seem to have less connection with our neighbors and everything else, and really going through this pandemic, I think, has opened a lot of people's eyes that I didn't make the effort to drive over and see my dad this weekend, and now I haven't seen him for 5 months. I think that was a really big awakening for a lot of people, and just a snippet of what it felt like to be torn away from someone that you had no control if you could see or not.
Another question, in the book, the family had moved to the United States for a while, so the main character was actually born in the United States. Her sisters, I think, had been born in Syria.
Yes.
And so then the family lived in the United States, lived in New York, then the father passed away, and
Right.
the mother wanted to be close to her family and her roots again, so she moved the family back to Syria. Do you ever, I guess it's two things. One, it just shows you how much the love of your homeland will never end despite what hardships you may have faced there.
Sure.
And two, I guess my question is, how do you see families, refugee families, reconcile the bad things they experienced with the love they have for their homeland, and then the thought of, will I go back, can I go back, will I never, just anything you hear about that?
Sure, and the concept of home is something that is really interesting depending on who you're talking to and what member of the family. We've been working with families, some have been here 2 years, some have been here 15 years. So it's really interesting, when you have kids that may have been born in the refugee camp, so they have never been to the country that their parents were born in, or the kids that were born in the United States after their parents came. There was a quote I wrote down from one of the characters in the book, and it says, "A person can be two things at the same time. The land where your parents were born will always be in you." And that this is almost the struggle between two worlds, and we see that a lot, even with young children or teens, where they're the ones that are learning English first. They're the ones that become more culturally Americanized, and kind of that struggle that am I American, or am I what my parents are, or am I a blend in between, and what mask am I wearing to be everything to everybody. And another thing that's really I think shocking is realizing that for many of the families we serve, they're coming from countries that have been unstable and unsafe for decades. I think of Somalia, where we have a lot of families. Somalia has not had a functioning government for decades. And I have a staff member who is a former resettled refugee from Somalia, who left Somalia at age 6 to go to a refugee camp in Uganda, and he was there for 16 years before resettling in Rochester. And he resettled in Rochester probably almost 15 years ago, and he still does not feel like it is safe enough for him to return to visit Somalia. And so thinking of it in that way, that we think of these conflicts, that when they're over, people will just go home. That's a prime example of no. And he even shared with me the fear he had that now he's become an American citizen, that if he were to return and the word got out that he's American now, and would that put a target on him, which is really awful to think. But for him especially, thinking about Somalia is his home, and he loves Somalia, and he grew up in Uganda, and he loves Uganda, and but when he got his citizenship, it was such a big deal, and he was so proud and so happy. The first time he voted, we were talking to him, and he had said, "I am so proud to live in a country with a functioning government where I can vote, and I can vote for whoever I want to, and I won't be thrown in jail or arrested, or it's been such a tough time with the way the rhetoric that sometimes unfortunately is said about refugees, resettled refugees, and for him there was no hatred, no anger, that he just said, I am blessed to be here. I get and even if people think a certain way, that's okay, because I'll pray for them, I'll think for them, I'll connect with them, I'll reach out, whatever I can do to show them that we want to be here, we want to make our communities better, and really give back to a country that they feel saves them.
That was kind of segues into the last question I had, was really, what would be like the last thing you'd want us to know about Mary's Place, or
Sure.
a misconception about refugees, or
Sure.
something you want us to think about refugees in our community as we go forward after your review?
Sure. So, we are a small nonprofit located on Lexington Avenue. We're in the Maplewood, Edgerton neighborhoods, which is where a lot of our families get resettled. And we offer all free services, everything from English classes, even though they're suspended at the moment, job skills classes, immigration assistance. So many people are so thrilled and excited with the idea of becoming citizens. And that's such an important goal for people. Case management. I can't tell you the amount of moms that come to us that maybe now have their spoken English, but they still struggle so much with the reading and writing, that just come with their mail wanting it read to them. Is this a scam? Is this is my child's school? Their letters are not sent home in Nepali. What are they telling me? And helping with everything from making doctor's appointments to finding housing to teaching people their rights. I tell this story often because I think it really shows the trauma and fear that many of our families have. We had a single mom with 5 children. She was a widow, and she went 3 weeks without running water in her apartment because she thought if she complained to her landlord, he could get her deported, which absolutely is not true. And this talks about, the concept of tenants' rights and having, the idea that she was so afraid to upset a person of authority due to the years and years of how poorly she'd been treated by persons of authority. And feeling so grateful that we could step in and make sure the repairs were done in her apartment and make sure that she felt safe and that her children had clothing and hygiene and things that they needed. Because these families, if you're lucky enough to be in a 2-parent household anywhere in America where both parents are working full-time, you're struggling. And we have a group of people that may have these amazing skills, whether it be in farming, or people that were working as midwives, or people who were involved in their military or had any sort of job. When you get relocated, it's not easy to pick up the pieces and jump right in. If you lived your whole life in an agricultural country where you were a farmer, and now you live in downtown Rochester, you're not farming. And so working with people and helping them find goals and helping them work towards getting their version of the American dream, what they need. The number one goal I'm always hearing from moms is, all I want is for my kids to graduate high school and go to college. The concept of that, which is so amazing. And we've seen kids, Mary's Place has been around for 11 years, and we have seen kids that maybe were in that first batch when we first opened, and we had such limited resources, and we're really a drop-in place that, your kids don't have a coat, let's get you a coat, or let's help with homework. And seeing there's a young woman now who was born and she's originally from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and she was born in a refugee camp and came here as a young girl, and she is now in nursing school, and she is so thrilled. And I have seen so many children of refugees that are going into the medical field or social work, or who wanted to be firefighters, or is something that is so deeply ingrained with public service and giving back to the community. And it's really amazing to me to see that. So, we're so thrilled that we get this opportunity to work with these families and gain their trust. One of our biggest changes that we had to make due to COVID-19 was we used to be a place where once a week families could come in and get some food and hygiene products for their families for the week. And we work with FoodLink, who has been so amazing to us. But the second that we decided to close mid-March for safety reasons, we said, well, what are we going to do? We can't have hundreds of people lining up to come in and safely receive boxes of produce and shampoos and soaps. So we were miraculously able to round up volunteers literally the first week, and once a week since mid-March we have been able to deliver food and hygiene products and information to, at that time it was 65 families. We're now over 95 families, and these are big families. That's over 500 people. And having that connection and letting them know that we're still there for them, and being able to make sure that families are safe and getting the information they need, especially during this time when there's so many rumors and confusion when it comes to how to stay safe during the pandemic.
And school.
Oh, yes.
Online school.
I cannot imagine how difficult it has been for some of our moms who have numerous children that are school age, attend the city school district, which now is all virtual, and having, moms that may have very limited literacy, let alone not be tech savvy, and then say, oh, hey, you guys are kind of homeschooling now, good luck. Oh, good Lord. So that's why we're trying to make sure that we can be that kind of intermediary, and making sure if there are things that have been lost in translation, if there's confusion. We're going to be working with a mom later today that still has not received her Chromebooks and Wi-Fi, so her kids have not started school yet. And this is why we exist, to find those families that have fallen through the cracks and give them all the support they need because they are amazing survivors, and their fate should not be determined by the fact that they were born in a country of war. And so the fact that we can and do open our hearts and try to give them as much as they need is really an honor on our part.
Thank you so much.
Thank
really
you.
appreciate
Read
it.
the book.
Charlsey.
Read the book. Read the book.